until then, we always have an uncle who says, hey, Soviet Union, look what they've done for
Right.
healthcare. Look what Cuba has done for healthcare.
Right.
What they've done for education, literacy. And you might say, yeah, it's a good rhetorical point. But
it's a good point until he's the uncle, just sitting in the corner there, voicing his opinion.
Uncle is nice to laugh at and have a great conversation. But I think just as you mentioned, until that point when he won Nevada and became the front runner, and people started talking about him taking all the states.
Yeah.
Until that point, everyone thought fine. But then people realized no matter what, he is actually going to say this on stage with Donald Trump, and that's not going to play well. I mean, you can write the lines of those commercials. So I think that's,
Yeah, it was funny because, somebody was asking Trump after Super Tuesday when Biden did really well, and somebody was asking Trump if he's prepared for Biden, and he said, I was ready. I was ready for Bernie, socialist, all this, all that. So he was licking his lips at the prospect of, facing Bernie in the Democratic debate. So that tells you a lot, I suppose. Right. And I wonder. Sorry, go on, Suhag.
Just real quick, there was a great political cartoon where they had a bunch of people on the sidelines with red shirts and "Make America Great Again" hats, cheering as Bernie's running through the finish line. So, to what you were saying, there's great political satire out there.
Yeah, I mean that I suppose it tells you a lot about your candidate if your opposition is stoked that he's doing really well. Yeah, and it is also interesting. I'd like to know what your in your experience what Indian Americans' attitudes towards Bernie Sanders has been, because for people based in India, people don't have the best opinion in India, at least in my experience, of Bernie Sanders, particularly because, he's been one of the few political candidates who's been very outspoken about certain things that have happened in India, in particular Kashmir and the Citizenship Amendment Act. And even when recently, we've already talked about all the stuff that he said about Kashmir that people, obviously India was very unhappy with. And even right now, I feel like, all right, Kashmir, you said something, you're not very educated, fine. But what really, soured me on him even more is when he put out some statements about the violence that happened in Delhi recently. And he came out, and two of his biggest supporters, Ilhan Omar and AOC, they came out and they made statements about what happened in Delhi as well. And they very unequivocally sort of painted what happened in Delhi as a Hindu attack on Muslims. Which, even if you do a basic Google search, don't listen to me. I'm sure I'm a Hindutwadi, whatever. Don't listen to me. Just do a Google search of the victims of the violence in Delhi. And you'll find a very large number of Hindus among the victims and Muslims among the victims. So what it was a classical riot is what happened in Delhi. And to paint it as some sort of a Hindu pogrom against Muslims, which is a word which is very commonly used, it's at best, if we give them the benefit of the doubt, it's extremely irresponsible, and at worst it's extremely disingenuous. So I wonder what, after those kinds of statements, what kind of opinions do Indian Americans have of Bernie Sanders? So Assem, I'll let you go first.
Sure. Well, you hit on a lot of the main points, Sham. Look, Bernie, he was initially supported by Tulsi, right? So a lot of people were going to give, a lot of Indian Americans, Hindu Americans were going to give Bernie a lot of latitude, that if Tulsi saw something great in this guy, perhaps, he is. I mean, Hillary had a lot of issues of her own with vis-a-vis the community. Perhaps Bernie was going to give us a different path, forge a different path, a more, shall we say, an Obama-esque path was the hope, vis-a-vis India.
Yeah.
But those ideas came to a halt. What happened is, and whatever decision he made, that I'm going to play this base, I'm not going to play this base, or these are deeply held beliefs. Now, fine. Just like I was raised, as you might know, in South Florida. Faiz Shakir, the Pakistani American who supported, who's the campaign manager for Bernie, grew up in South Florida. Just another, brown kid from South Florida. So, how much does he deeply hold these views, and did that influence him or not? We don't know. But he took a very anti-India line very early, which really surprised me. He came out on Kashmir loud and clear that this was, a bad move, that this was a human rights violation.
I think, sorry to butt in really quickly, Assem, but I think what was also very telling is that he made this grand declaration about Kashmir at ISNACon. Like he makes it at the Islamic Students Conference. I think that's very pointed.
Yeah, exactly. The audience. Okay, was he playing to an audience, or these are deeply held beliefs? But, so he hit Kashmir, then he hit CAA, and then he hit the Delhi riots, sort of the trifecta of, and then you can see who his proxies are, who are his surrogates, and whether it's Mehdi Hasan, some of the other writers at The Intercept, is it, some of the people who are the most floridly anti-India, anti-Tulsi, kind of goes together. They all coalesce behind him. And it looked like a one-issue type of thing. You stand with Kashmir, and you look at various internet portals. Who knows who runs these portals? All of them, became big surrogates for Bernie. And I think the community saw that he's taken a side, which is never a smart thing. And I think Suhag has tweeted about that. You can look at the numbers. You have 3 million Hindu Americans, at least 1 million voters. And if you look at the states where they're concentrated, New Jersey, Massachusetts, Florida, Texas, they're enough to change a district. They're enough to change a voting number. I mean, let's not exaggerate the importance of the Indian American vote, but in certain districts, it can actually play a pivotal role. I mean, elections these days are decided by, 100 votes.
Right.
There's the states like Arizona, Florida, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Georgia, even Minnesota. These are all areas that have growing Indian American populations that are just slightly under 1%. So, those are some significant numbers. I will say, there was a National Asian American survey, and according to that, only 1/3 of Indian Americans reported getting any sort of call or party from either party.
Wow.
So I think that should send a signal to the two parties. I think that probably of late, you're probably seeing more overt efforts coming from the Republican Party in terms of making that sort of outreach. And it showed in Houston. If you look at the breakdown of which party was represented more on stage, it was a visible demonstration. So personally, I think that our community is healthiest if we have, a good number of, Indian American Republicans and a good number of Indian American Democrats, because we're not just a one issue community.
Yeah.
Sure, the U.S.-India relationship is a very important one and plays front and center. And I think there's probably a generational difference in terms of who it plays front and center for. Yeah. But there's a lot of other issues, and both parties aren't necessarily going to promote those issues in a way that best serves our community. And so I think that more outreach and sincere outreach, not just, hey, we have a Appia guy, and so he's going to reach out to you, but a really sincere effort where you're holding town halls, finding out from the community what's important to them would go a long ways.